What do you guys think of when you think of King David? Do you think about the man after God's heart? Do you think about the Psalms? Do you think about David defeating Goliath, or being the king of Israel? He was a good king. For the most part, David has a great reputation in Christian churches today. We love the Psalms. We recognize him as maybe the best king in the history of Israel. And he was, like I said, a man after God's heart. But there's a few moments in his life where David made some horrible mistakes. Criminal, disgusting, tragic mistakes. Today, we're just going to have a light conversation about the worst of those. Now, David was a shepherd boy who God plucked out of obscurity and anointed to be king. And not just to be king, but to replace the first king of ancient Israel, Saul. David rose through the military ranks and was successful in everything he did. But eventually he had to run for his life because Saul was trying to kill him. Even then, though, he attracted a group of followers who traveled with him, running from the law, like Robin Hood and his merry men. David patiently waited for God's timing when God would crown him king. And finally it happened. And David saw lots of victory against his enemies as he was king of Israel. But the years passed. And the man after God's heart eventually went after other things instead. If you want to follow along in your Bibles today, we're going to be reading from 2 Samuel chapter 11. It will also be on the screens. So, chapter 11, verse 1. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. From this very first verse, the author of 2 Samuel is drawing something to your attention. Did you catch it? In the time when kings go off to war, David stayed home. David sent out his commander Joab and the Israelite army, but he himself stayed in his palace, safe, comfortable, living in luxury. In the spring, the snow is melted and armies can travel safely. In the spring, kings go off to war. David wasn't acting much like a king. It's a pretty strong denouncement right off the bat. It's foreshadowing the failure to come of David not acting like a leader should. This is 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 2 now. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. And David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She's Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. She was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, "I am pregnant." It all happened so fast, and yet this is no accident. David sees her. He doesn't look away. He sends someone to find out about her. He hears she's married to Uriah, a soldier in David's army, which, if you remember, is off fighting the war that David's supposed to be at. That doesn't deter David either. He sends for her, he sleeps with her, he sends her back home. Before long, she finds out she's pregnant. You know, we always hear this story from David's perspective. We hear how he panics to cover this up, how he pulls all these strings to get what he wants, and eventually, how he repents and realizes the sin he's committed. And we're going to get to that today. But we rarely think of this story from Bathsheba's perspective. In fact, Bathsheba never speaks directly in this whole narrative. Her only words are through a messenger at the end, saying, "I am pregnant." Her silence is deafening. Imagine being this woman, with almost no status in that society, being called before this king, this greatly respected, honored, and feared king. Imagine being put in that situation. What is she supposed to do? Refuse the king? Expose the actions of this man after God's own heart? I think we've done a great disservice to Bathsheba by seeing her as anything besides the victim in this horrible situation. So David tries to cover up his mistake. he hears she's pregnant, and he starts looking for a way out. He brings Uriah back home from the battlefield, thinking Uriah will sleep with his wife, and he'll never know that baby isn't his. Now, Uriah was a Hittite, which meant he had foreign background. But Uriah the Hittite, the common soldier, proves to be more honorable than David, the Israelite, the king. Uriah refuses to sleep with his own wife while the battle is still waging on. And after all, his brothers are still out there in the trenches. So when David's manipulative scheming fails, he resorts to a more sinister approach. He orders his commanders to have Uriah killed in battle. Send him to the front, and have everyone else retreat. Make it look like an accident. This is mafia-level treachery. And David, he's the godfather. The plan works perfectly. Uriah is killed, along with a number of other soldiers, which I guess were sacrifices David was willing to make. Strikingly, David tells one of his commanders, "Don't worry about this matter. Literally, don't let this be evil in your eyes." And then the final verse of this chapter says, "But the thing David had done was evil in the eyes of the Lord." That's not a contrast you want. Once again, let's return our thoughts to Bathsheba. She is completely powerless in all of this. She doesn't know what David's plotting, but she gets word that her husband has been killed. Does she feel guilt? Does she feel shame? Maybe righteous anger? Does she suspect David's hand in this? The Bible doesn't tell us. It only tells us in verse 26, when Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. And then, after the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house. Once again, with Bathsheba taking on this passive role, she became his wife and bore him a son. David's decisions snowball into this tragedy, and Bathsheba's caught right in the middle of it. It's her life that's forever changed. And throughout the rest of the Bible, she is forever known as the wife of Uriah, which has this stinging quality to it, because it always points us back to this moment in the story. The Bible is so fascinating to me, because it makes for pretty terrible propaganda if you think about it, right? What kind of nation would want to include this story about their most famous king? Shouldn't this have been covered up or glossed over? Here it is in the book of Samuel, right along stories of David defeating Goliath and being that man after God's own heart. It doesn't shy away from this part of David's story. Now, here's the interesting part. Let's fast forward like 1,000 years. Flip through all the wisdom literature and the major and minor prophets, and you come to the first book of the New Testament, Matthew. Many well-intentioned Bible readers have said to themselves, I'm just going to start in Matthew and read through the whole New Testament, only to get bogged down in this colossal family tree of name after unrecognizable name. Essentially, Matthew begins his gospel with a list of names of all the ancestors of Jesus going all the way back to Abraham. I will be honest, I used to think this list was so boring. Why would Matthew start the greatest story ever told by putting his readers to sleep? And so many times I've just skipped over this. Like, okay, we get it. Let's move on to whatever comes next when Jesus shows up. But there's a purpose for this genealogy. Matthew is showing the way Jesus comes from and is connected to everything God has been doing throughout the history of Israel. And if we look closely, Matthew has nestled some profound points into this genealogy. Not the least of which, about a third of the way down, Matthew tells us Jesus was related to David, father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. David leads to Jesus. Bathsheba leads to Jesus. God uses this tragic, horrible, sinful action of David against Bathsheba and her husband Uriah to somehow, some way, lead to Jesus. Now, make no mistake, this does not mean God orchestrated this to happen. This does not mean God approved of this in any way. It was evil in his eyes, remember? He was just as disgusted as we are, more so. God mourned with Bathsheba when this happened. He was heartbroken. And yet, God has this amazing way of taking the most broken, messed up parts of our stories and redeeming them for good. How often do we pause and think back over our own story? The way you were raised, your relationship with your parents, things you've accomplished, times you've failed, the people you've met, the people who've hurt you, the people you've hurt, the things you used to believe that you don't anymore, or that person you used to be that you aren't anymore. See, all of us are writing this story with our lives, but some of us try not to look back on those previous chapters because there are parts of our story that are just too painful. We want to cover up and gloss over our stories, just like we would expect the Bible to do the same to David. And yet these are the parts of the story that God is most eager to somehow, some way, redeem. It was fun getting to hang out with the kids this morning. I was researching St. Patrick last week and finding out all the stuff about him I never knew. The more I looked into his story, the more it blew my mind. What kind of person escapes slavery and then returns to his slave owners? Patrick must have thought slavery was the worst possible thing that could happen to him. I can't imagine living in those conditions, having that as your story. Now, as a slave, Patrick could have given up on God, but he didn't. And as a free man, Patrick could have been content with the life of freedom that he had. But he wasn't. He knew his story was there for a reason. He knew God could use his story to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. He knew God wanted to redeem his story, to bring healing to Patrick, to bring healing to Ireland, and to bring glory to God. But see, if we hold our stories back from God, we never actually allow ourselves to heal. We tell God, no, this part of my story is too painful. I don't want to show it to you. I don't want you to do anything with it. I just want to ship it away and pretend it never happened. But then months or years later, something triggers in us, and it all comes flooding back. And we realize we never sent it away at all. We just buried it under layers and layers of denial. In LA, there's this organization called Homeboy Industries that rehabilitates gang members, gives them a job, puts them through drug rehab, and shares the love of Christ with them. Father Gregory Boyle, the founder, says, at Homeboy Industries, we don't teach homies not to be angry, but how to be angry. To move forward, homies must make a choice to no longer be a victim of their own anger. They befriend their wound to keep them from despising their woundedness. Our brokenness is meant to be kept close. I love that. All of us have brokenness in our stories. Brokenness we need to accept. Some of us have been the Bathsheba, the victim. We've been used and abused, hurt, manipulated. We felt powerless and vulnerable at times. And when we needed someone to stand up for us the most, we were all alone. Some of us have been the David, the victimizer. Maybe not in the way David was, but in those small ways. Maybe through things we've said, ways we've hurt others, taken advantage of others. Maybe we just made that comment or looked at that image, laughed at that joke. I suspect most of us are a little bit of both. David, Bathsheba, broken people with painful parts of our stories. David was eventually confronted with his sin. The prophet Nathan brought it to David's attention in a way that he couldn't deny or escape. David repented. He broke down. In the famous Psalm 51, which is often attributed to David as he repented, it says, "My sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit. A broken and contrite heart, you, God, will not despise." We aren't told how Bathsheba felt. We aren't given a glimpse into her spiritual journey. I can only suspect that she too had a broken spirit for other reasons. But David learned to embrace his brokenness, embrace his story, and bring it to God. This is me. All of me. Nothing held back. Do with it what you will. God can't redeem our stories until we learn to embrace our stories and say, "Here's my spirit, Lord. It's broken, but it's yours." We can't heal until we learn to accept the way we've been hurt and the ways we've hurt others. And when I think back on my own story, it's not all that intense. I've lived a pretty good life. But I often think back on all of the shame that I've carried around for so long. I don't know where it came from exactly. I just remember always feeling unworthy, unlovable, like I didn't fit in or I wasn't normal. I wasn't picked on a ton, but there are always those little moments as you're growing up, those little moments that stick with you and contribute to that voice in your head saying, "You are not good enough." What's hardest to accept for me, though, as I think back on my story, is the way I used that shame to shame others. I would put others down to make myself feel better. And the ones who always got the worst of it were my friends, my family, my little brothers. It wasn't until so much later that I was able to start addressing my shame directly, embracing my story for what it was, and I was able to learn to love myself. Only then could I truly love others. And now, in ministry and in life, I often find one of my biggest goals is to make sure others don't feel shame, to make sure they feel lifted up instead of torn down, to include those who feel like they're on the outside. No matter what you've done or what's been done to you, God wants to redeem your story for your healing and His glory. I imagine when David was in the middle of covering up his sin, he never imagined God could bring anything good out of it. I imagine when Bathsheba was in the middle of mourning, she never imagined God would use her to eventually redeem the whole world. God is in the business of redeeming our stories. I want to close today by doing something a little different. If you'll humor me, I want to ask you all to close your eyes, and I'm going to ask some questions as we think back on our stories. This is just between you and God right now. Close your eyes with me. Think back on your story. What do you feel when you think about your story? Shame? Joy? Anxiety? Fear? Gratitude? Anger? Sadness? Love? When have you been hurt? When have you hurt others? When did God feel far away? Or did God feel close? With your story in mind, who are you uniquely qualified to talk to because of your story? Who can you relate to because of your story? I'd like to invite the worship team back up as we close in prayer. Lord, we just want to lift our stories up to you. The beautiful parts, the messy parts, the tragedy and the joy. God, help us to embrace every part of our stories. Heal us where we need healing. Put together the broken parts. Help us to seek community and people we can walk through our stories together with. Jesus, we ask that our stories wouldn't go to waste. Whatever we've done or whatever has been done to us, we pray that you would somehow, some way, redeem it and use it for your glory. Give us the courage to share our stories when the time is right. Jesus, I pray that by sharing our stories, we would be sharing